Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello, welcome back. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. I'm DR the Book Guy, and with us today we have Linwood Barclay. He's the author of 18 novels, 2 thrillers for children, New York Times bestselling author, based in Ontario somewhere. His latest novel is Find You First. I have it right in front of me. It's about the mysterious deaths of some people who might or might not be the children of a tech millionaire. Linwood Barclay, thank you very much, and welcome to Talking Books and Writing and Stuff.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be here.
And apparently your math teacher or your principal when you were a kid said if you spent more time in math than on writing, you'd do better. Is that true?
That was when I was in grade 6. I think it was, and I was writing stories all the time like crazy. And one day the principal sort of strolled into the classroom and just sort of walking around chatting with kids. And he sort of knelt down next to me and said, "Hey, how's it going?" And he said, "You know, you might be doing better in math if you didn't spend so much time writing stories." And I think even then I knew that he was an idiot. But
That's right.
so that didn't. So I didn't really pay any attention to that. My math skills were actually not too bad, but I never did stop writing the stories.
Well, that's good because I was always told in elementary school if Dennis would quit being the class clown, he might get better in academics. But it was more fun being the class clown. So you went into the newspaper business. Now, did you go to any post-secondary education after high school or right into the workforce?
Yeah, I got an honors BA in English at Trent University from reading the Coles Notes on some of the greatest works of literature ever written. And so I did. So I spent 4 years in Peterborough at Trent University, and then shortly after leaving university, I got my first newspaper job at the Peterborough Examiner, where I spent a couple of years, or 4 or 5 if you count overtime.
Right. So they don't pay you for overtime in the newspaper business, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, they got, in lieu of, you could take some time off. So that's what I did.
Oh, good. And lost my train of thought, which, is standard. Oh, yes. I'm just wondering, do you still have your story about the guy who makes crafts out of walnuts?
I don't know if I saved that clipping or not. It was such a high point in my career. You would think that I would save that. But, you'd have, you were sort of desperate for weekend stories for the Examiner. And there was this guy who would use like pipe cleaner stuff to make the arms, and then he would bore little holes into walnuts to make these characters. To this day, I can't believe we thought that was newsworthy. But I did that story.
Well, it's like that Ricky Gervais series that's out about Afterlife, where he's the reporter for a small weekly paper, and they go and interview all these people with their various peccadillos, and they collect glasses.
Yeah, it was kind of in that category.
That's right. Newspaper writing prepared you to be a novelist, do you think? Because he had to churn out stories.
Yeah, because I spent a couple of years at the Peterborough Examiner. I ended up at the Toronto Star in '81, and I was at the Star for 27 years. And for the last 14 of them or so, I was a columnist. But newspapers teach you discipline, and it teaches you that writing is a job, not some sort of romantic sort of endeavor where you wait for the muse to strike. You just get to work. And deadlines are God, everything. Yep. So, so I worked in for a long time in the production end of things. I mean, I was a assistant city editor and news editor and chief copy editor and life editor. I was doing all those different kinds of things before I started doing columns. So, so it was very much, you sit down, you go to work, and that's a kind of habit that I have kept. So when I'm in the thick of writing a book, I just, you go to work, you crank it out.
That's the key, I think. Linwood Barclay is with us. We're bouncing all over the place here because I'm talking to a big-time author. This is pretty cool, but I've always wanted my dream when I was maybe same thing, grade 6, grade 7, was to be a newspaper columnist. I thought that would have been just the greatest thing on the history of the world. And later on in life, in my 40s and 50s, I was one for a while at a newspaper in Bellingham, Washington. So that was pretty neat.
Yep.
But it was a freelance thing. I did a column a week talking to Americans about Canada. So that was pretty cool.
That's pretty neat. I loved having a column. Like I did 3 a week, and it was allegedly a humor column, but you always feel you have to kind of qualify. I mean, if you write a really badly written sports column, it's still pretty obvious that it's a sports column. But if you write a badly written humor column and no one has any notion at all that it's meant to be funny or satirical, then I don't know quite what you've accomplished. But it was always a risk in writing satire in a newspaper, because if there wasn't a huge banner that said, "Don't take this seriously," there was always somebody who would take it at face value. And it didn't matter how ridiculous it might have been. Someone was, I remember one time, back when that Russian satellite was still orbiting Earth, the one that came down and crashed eventually, I suggested some tongue-in-cheek places to send your kids for the March break, for the spring break, and said, why not send your kids to Mir Space Station Camp? But if you do, dress them warmly because it's cold in space, and send them with lots of duct tape because there's holes in the hull and everything. So I swear, a guy called the paper the next day. He said, you didn't put in a phone number. Now, how do you deal with that? I just don't know.
And it might seem to the outsider, it's easy to do a column, but there was pressure for me to do one a week. I don't know how you could do 3 or 4 a week.
Someone once said to me that doing one a week is harder than doing 3, because if you do only one a week, it better be good. But if you do 3 and one's a clunker, well, there'll be another one along in 2 days. People will forget that one.
Linwood Barclay is with us. The latest book is Find You First, and I'm not trying to butter you up here, but as a book reviewer and podcast interview, I have like 15 books on my bedside, and I'll read a chapter and then go to another one. This one, truly, I could not put down. Well,
that's good to hear.
Kept reading and reading. So, and the other thing is, in our family, we have a dozen, maybe, of half-siblings and siblings that aren't really connected, but they are connected. So what gave you the idea for this? Where was the aha moment, or the what-if moment?
Yeah, well, and maybe before I tell you what that was, it's just briefly to explain what the premise for the book is. It's about a tech millionaire in his 40s who's got more money than God, but he realizes one thing you can't buy is time. And he has terminal illness that is also a 50% chance that it could be passed on to the next generation. And people think, well, it's a good thing you never got married, didn't have kids. And what they're not aware of is that some 2 decades ago, he was a sperm donor. So he learns that he may have as many as 9 grown children out there. So after some soul searching, he thinks, well, you know what, I should find out who they are so I can warn them that they might have this. And also, who am I going to leave my estate to? And as he starts on this quest to find these individuals, they all start vanishing one by one. So the idea for it, I think, initially may have come from, there was a piece in, I think it was the New York Times Magazine, that was a photo essay of someone who had gone across the country and was taking pictures of half-siblings. They were all from the same sperm donor. And being a thriller writer, instead of seeing this as kind of an interesting, heartwarming story, I always, my first take is, how could this go horribly wrong? and I think that might have been just the very sort of beginning of an idea for a book, was that piece.
And that's Linwood Barclay talking about Find You First. It's out there now and always will be. Linwood Barclay, also right in front of me right now, I have Never Look Away, a thriller, and I got it at the discount rack at Kohl's. So is that the fate of all writers? Is your books are going to end up on the discount bin sooner or later?
Oh, heck no. I mean, if you go to the remainders section of a Chapters or any kind of store, you'll find books by everybody from Stephen King to James Patterson. I mean, those are, and as long as people can find them, if somebody finds my book and picks it up for $1.50, and enjoys it, then they'll go out and buy the new one and spend more. So that's fine with me.
That's fine. And that's the goal, isn't it? Just money and fame and stuff aside, isn't just to have other people read your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's, word of mouth is everything in this business. You can see a book review, you can see an ad for an ad in a magazine for a book, but it's often when a friend says, "Oh my God, you got to read this," or a bookseller that personally, you go into the store and they hand sell you. They say, "You've got to read this," and I find that more persuasive in getting somebody to read a book than just about anything else.
Well, we're hoping this is a giant word of mouth situation and people will read your work. Linwood Barclay. Now, I understand you were a big fan of Ross MacDonald, and I guess what I have right in front of me is Ross MacDonald, The Goodbye Look. So,
that was the first. Is that the Bantam paperback edition?
It's the paperback. Yes, I've got the Drowning Pool and the Blue Hammer. And this is a Bantam book as well, yes. So
I'm looking at those very books on my shelf right now. The very first Ross MacDonald novel I ever bought was The Goodbye Look. I was 15 years old, and I bought it off the twirling, metal, squeaky paperback rack at the IGA grocery store. And what intrigued me about it was a blurb at the top of the cover that said, "The finest series of detective novels ever written by an American," which was from a New York Times review by William Goldman.
Yep, it's right there.
So I picked that up, and devoured it, and then read everything I could find of his. And to the point where, when I was in university and I was doing a thesis on the private detective as an iconic figure in literature, I wrote to him, care of his publisher, which began a quite lengthy correspondence that ended with, when he was coming up to Canada, he and I had dinner together one night.
Oh, wow.
And I was 21. And to be at that age, to meet your favorite writer, sort of hero on the planet, and be able to sit and have dinner and spend a few hours with him, well, I still can't even believe it happened. And I have right now, I'm looking at on the shelf, I have a hardback edition of his novel, Sleeping Beauty, and in that he wrote, "For Linwood, who will, I hope, someday outright me." Signed Kenneth Miller, which was his real name, and then bracket Ross MacDonald. And that was May of 1976.
Now, there is a Canadian connection with him, isn't there? Isn't his wife Canadian?
Quite. He was born in the U.S., but he was raised in Ontario. And grew up in Ontario. He was a teacher in Kitchener, Ontario, a high school teacher. And he lived in Toronto and wrote for Saturday Night Magazine and so forth. And then ended up, I think, going to Michigan, to Ann Arbor, and ultimately ended up in California, which is where pretty much most of his books are set. So he had quite a background in Canada. Some people think he's a Canadian writer, but he is not.
Right.
But he did spend a lot of time. He married the well-known mystery writer Margaret Miller, who he met in Kitchener.
There we go. And Linwood Barclay is with us here on Talking Books. Find You First, the latest novel by Linwood Barclay, like we said, about a tech millionaire who's trying to find all his heirs that he didn't know he had. Also, again, the other day we're flicking through the dial and we run across this movie. It's called Never Saw It Coming. And we went, oh, let's watch this. And then at the end it goes, blah, 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 written by or produced by Linwood Barclay. So what? How did that come about?
Well, the director of that movie is a woman named Gail Harvey. And Gail and I used to work together at the Toronto Star years ago when I was an editor on the desk, and she worked on the photo desk. She was a photographer and photo editor. And then she went on to have a career working in film and TV and directing like Murdoch Mysteries and all kinds of, lots of things. And we reconnected when we both had a place in Prince Edward County in Ontario. And she said, do you have some book that hasn't been optioned that you think would make a good little movie? And I said, Never Saw It Coming. And I said, it's almost a kind of Coen Brothers kind of thing. And so she said, would you write a script on spec and I'll try to find money? And so I did, and she did. And so we got that movie made on a shoestring budget, and then we got Eric Roberts in it and Emily Hampshire from Schitt's Creek to star in it. And it got made,
Yes.
and so it's on Crave in Canada. We haven't gotten it out of Canada yet for a wider audience, but it was a great experience for me to write a screenplay because it was something I always I loved to do. Like when I sort of dipped my toe into that kind of field. So that was a very fun experience to be able to do that, a good learning experience. And since then, I've done a lot more screenwriting for things that have not happened.
Right.
That's kind of, welcome to Hollywood. I mean, I've worked with some actually very big and important, prestigious people and worked on stuff for a great length of time and many drafts. And then finally a network or a studio will decide, nah, I don't think we'll do it. So, but at the moment, I'm fingers crossed. I have written a screenplay adaptation of my novel, Fear the Worst. Jason Priestley's aboard. He wants to star in it and produce. And we think we have a director, and so we're putting together a package, and we're hoping to get something done on that.
And that's great. That's Linwood Barclay talking about the movie business. Now, I've heard, is it, an apocryphal story, is that there's people who make a living all their lives in Hollywood or wherever writing screenplays that never get produced.
I've heard that, yeah. I think that would be kind of soul-destroying. When you get a book contract, the book comes out. But when you sometimes have contracts to write, for screenplays and stuff, you just don't know if they'll ever come out. And so I think I'd rather spend most of my time in the book business because at least you have something at the end of the ride. You've got this book in your hand that you can hold and people can read it. But the movie business is very different.
Well, never saw it coming. I sit there because I'm one of those geeks who watch the movies right to the end credits, the third assistant hairdresser and all that stuff. And it was made in Sudbury, apparently. Were you involved? Were you involved in the production, like on the set?
We went up for a couple of days, my wife and I. We weren't up there for much of the shoot because I was swamped with a bunch of other things at the time. But we did go up. Right towards the end, we drove up from Toronto, where we live, and we're on the set and watched them shoot some of the scenes, and that was fun. We did that also, I guess, about 4 years ago. They did make a 6-part TV series out of one of my books in France. They made The Accident. The Accident was made into a TV series in France. And I, of course, needless to say, did not write that screenplay because it was, in French and they changed the names of characters and stuff. But we went over for part of that shoot, and that was a lot of fun as well. That was just kind of surreal to be able to go all the way over there and see all these people, 50 people taking over this town to make this show. It was a lot of fun.
And speaking of movies, Never Look Away, that book we were talking about, one of your earlier ones. The premise, I've seen other movies with the same premise. Did they adapt it from your book somehow, or is that just coincidence?
Well, I don't know which one you might be thinking of, but there's another one that I think was a bit similar to Never Look Away, but Never Look Away has not been made into anything or been at this point.
Well, I was thinking.
I think it would make a great little movie.
Yeah,
Pardon?
I was thinking of a Halle Berry movie where she takes her kid to the park and then he disappears. So.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't thinking of that one. But I mean, of course, it's a kind of a bait and switch in Never Look Away, where you think it's a story about a kid who's vanished at an amusement park, but by the end of the prologue, they find the kid, but the wife's missing. Oh. And sometimes that's something I like to do, is take a trope or a situation that we're familiar with and think, how can I give this a bit of a twist and do something different with it?
And Linwood Barclay is with us now. Elevator Pitch, is that coming out next?
Oh, no, that's been out. That came out. Oh. That's the book before Find You First. That came out in September of 2019, and that was a fun book to do. That was Elevator Pitch, and that was the premise for that was, and of course, people know that, or a lot of people know that term elevator pitch is kind of what they use in Hollywood. They think, suppose you hopped onto an elevator with Steven Spielberg and he's going to get off at the 3rd floor. So that's how much time you've got to pitch your idea to him for a movie. And that's where the phrase elevator pitch came from. But I decided we titled that book, we have a more literal interpretation. Elevator pitch is about a different kind of serial killer who is dispatching his victims by sabotaging elevators throughout Manhattan. And if you weren't already scared to get on an elevator, this will take care of that.
So did you learn all about the ins and outs of how elevators work for this?
I did. I spent a day with a guy who is sort of in charge of maintenance and overseeing the elevators in one of the tallest office towers in Toronto. And he took me all through, and we would do things like we'd get off at the 20th floor, and then he would keep the doors open and send the elevator to the 19th floor. So then we could look at the top of the elevator and step on it and look up and do all this stuff. But the best thing was he had in his hand what looked like a really large TV remote. And he said, with this device, I can control every elevator in the building and everything that it does. And I thought, wow, what a really handy gadget. I said, I guess you wouldn't want that to fall into the wrong hands. And he said, oh, you can get these on eBay for $500.
What?
And I thought, now that might be troubling news to the average person, but for a thriller writer, I just went, yes, that's terrific. Now, granted, I might have taken a couple of liberties, and to be able to figure out how to do the interface between that gadget and an actual building and so forth, it would be tricky. But it's all I needed to know, that this was a real thing, this remote. And I just thought, yeah, I've got a thriller now. And so book was a lot of fun to do.
And Linwood Barclay is with us. Find You First is out there now, but I understand Find You First came out in England because we couldn't talk about it until it had been released in Canada. So.
Yeah, it came out February 4th in the UK and did very well there, and was on the London Sunday Times top 10 bestseller list and did quite well. And the paperback is going to come out over there in September. And so that was great. And of course, everybody over here seems to be quite miffed that they had to wait an extra few months. But it really varies from year to year where it will come out first. Sometimes it comes out at the same time. The pandemic kind of has some impact on publishing schedules for me over here. I think the book would have come out sooner here, but we made a decision many months ago to sort of delay it until May. And so, but now everyone can have it.
And they should. And it's Find You First. It'll keep you reading, actually, a good old page turner. And I don't think that's a derogatory term. I think if you're into a book so much you can't put it down, that's a good thing.
Oh, for sure. Without question. I mean, how would you like it if they put on the cover of your book, not a page turner? Just beyond dreary, this book.
You will hate this book. It's so boring, it puts the Waltons to sleep.
That's right.
As the business side of being a writer of your caliber and success, how do you handle that? Like, do you have a business manager? How do you get paid? How do you do your income tax? Do you get Canada pension deductions?
I'd have to hire a team. I mean, first of all, I have a fantastic literary agent who handles the contracts and negotiates my contracts and figures out all those sorts of things. And so I don't have to deal with that. And then I have to have a very smart accountant who can do all my stuff, because that is in no way my area of expertise. But there's always something that comes up that you have to, deal with. You're like, what do you want to do about this? What do you want to do about that? And I just have to rely on the wisdom of others in those areas. I mean, I know how to write the book, but I don't know how to sell it. I don't know how to, figure out what tax implications there are. I have no idea. So I think I like to hope that it's enough that I can write the thing and let other people figure out the other stuff.
Linwood Barclay, a question here about the book business, being a professional full-time writer. Is there a lesson, a hard lesson, something you had to learn that you didn't think would ever be a problem, but turned out to be a problem in your progress as a writer?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly there are a lot of, the sort of tax headaches and just paperwork and forms, and you have a lot of foreign contracts, when you have a Spanish publisher and a Italian publisher and all these things you have to sort of sort out and get tax forms for that. Again, I need help for that. But I think the biggest lesson for me was, the first 5 novels that I wrote, I was still employed in the newspaper business, and I was still doing 3 columns a week. And doing 3 columns a week, like 130 or so columns a year, and a book a year was killing me. So when the 5th book was successful enough, in fact, it was the number 1 selling book of the year in the UK in 2008. When that happened, I thought I can give up the newspaper job and just do books. And because I can usually write a novel in about 3 months, I thought, well, this is going to be great. When I quit the newspaper biz, I'll have 3 months of the year where I have to write a book, and I'll have 9 months of the year off. And it hasn't happened yet.
Not yet.
It hasn't happened yet. And that's going back to 2006, because there's always something. There's rewrites, there's tours, there's other projects, there's all these things that come up that you know were going to come up. And so those 9 months off have yet to happen. I think there's probably 2.5 to 3 spaced out over the year where I can kind of coast. But that didn't really come to pass. And just as well, because if I'd had 9 months off, I wouldn't have known what to do with myself.
Okay. And an editor, what does an editor actually do for you? Do they change the book sometimes in ways you don't want, or?
Well, they don't do that, but they may make suggestions in ways that I don't want. But the thing is that every book that I have done has gotten better with help and input from a really good editor. And sometimes, they help you identify where maybe you've gone astray, or it doesn't work out, or this character's not working. And sometimes they make suggestions that you completely disagree with. But the fact that they've made the suggestion means that they've identified something in the book that's not working. And that allows you to see it, and you think, okay, I'm going to fix this. I'm not going to fix it the way you suggested, but I have another idea. And that turns out to be a really good one. And so editors are invaluable. There's a lot of authors out there who reach a level of success, and they say, I'm not changing one word. I don't want any editor touching this. And those authors who get that, full of themselves, they miss an opportunity to make the book better, because we all want the same thing, presumably, which is to put out the best book that you can. And if you don't want to take any input from someone, then you probably had a chance to make it better, but it's not going to happen.
Linwood Barclay is with us. Find You First is the book you should find first for your reading this weekend or next week or when you're on vacation. But you started in the newspaper business. Do you have any optimism about the future of newspapers?
Not a lot. It's one of the things that worries me. It even comes up as a theme in a couple of the books. I'm very worried for newspapers that they have not been able to find a kind of funding model. I mean, it works if you're the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you're big enough and you're online, that can work. But I fear what's happening is that as local newspapers either get shut down or obliged or forced by their parent, their overlord corporate empires to run copy from a central location, that you won't have anybody who's going to cover the local school board, local city council, local trials. There's not going to be anybody to do that. And so you're not going to have anyone who's holding local officials accountable in any way. And I think that's a very bad thing.
Well, me too. I've grown up with newspapers since I was 6 or 7 and read them every day. And when we go on vacation, I track down the local paper and read it. And it's just, to me, newspapers should have gone big instead of gone small, because I don't want to go searching through 15 different websites to find out who the BC Lions traded yesterday for a new quarterback. I want it right there in front of me. I want somebody else to print that stuff out and deliver it to me. I don't want to fight through 15
and the thing is,
screens.
I don't mind if it's online. Like I have stopped subscribing to any physical newsprint paper. I don't get one at all anymore, but I subscribe to papers online and read them every day. And I think that's fine, but is there a way that what were smaller papers can have a presence online even for, so you can get local content? And I think that's the struggle. I really do.
I also hear that the weekly newspapers are sort of at least holding their own, if not making a bit of a resurgence.
Yeah, that I not. So that I know less about. I don't know. I know that where we used to live, there was a local newspaper, and all it did was basically wrap around enough ads that you could start 28 forest fires. And but in terms of actual, they weren't taking any of that ad revenue and using it to hire reporters to find out what was going on in that town.
Gotcha.
They were just using it as a way to suck up money, and that was it.
Linwood Barclay is with us. Do you still use that old Royal typewriter that you started out with years ago?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Do you still use your old Royal typeviter from years ago?
No. I haven't written anything on a manual typewriter since probably 1992, even an electric one. I don't know whatever happened to that old Royal typewriter. I did buy a lovely old Underwood about 10 years ago, just because it was just such a neat piece of art in a way. But I don't even print out my books anymore. I write everything on a computer. I don't print it out. I edit it on the computer, and then I just email it to my publisher. So I'm saving a fortune on paper.
Right. and your writing routine, is it a daily 9 to 5 kind of thing?
Yeah, when I'm in the thick of writing a novel, I'm usually at my desk between 8 and 8:30, and the goal is to write 2,000 words. Some days I do a little less. Some days I can do more. And I usually go till about 2:30 or so, and because I figure if you can get 2,000 words a day done, that's 10,000 a week, and in 2.5 months you've got a first draft. So that's pretty much my routine. And like I say, working in newspapers, but that kind of work ethic, you sit down and you just go to work, and there's none of this waiting for the muse to strike. You've got a job to do, so you got to get going.
And one more question. Obvious one that you've always said, or in previous interviews, if people want to be writers, they should be readers first and foremost, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I heard someone say one time, that they really wanted to write a book, but that they really don't have much time to read, which always struck me as like, I want to be a chef, but I'm not really that interested in eating anything. And I think that just reading and reading different people and different genres and different kinds of just teaches you so much. I mean, you wouldn't be a filmmaker unless you watched an awful lot of movies. And so I think the same is true of books. If you want to write a book, you should have read a lot of them, and probably started when you were about 6 years old.
Exactly. Linwood Barclay has been with us today. Find You First is the latest. There will be more coming, and there's lots more on the back list, as they say. Track them down. Go see that movie, Never Saw It Coming, because it does have a twist at the ending that you won't see coming. Linwood, thank you very much for your time today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.